of the Patel College of Global Sustainability at the University of South Florida. This afternoon, so welcome to our Sustainability Speaker Series. This afternoon, we have a distinguished speaker, Susy Torriente. I will briefly introduce her to you. You can read her long biography, or you probably got the bio in our mail. Susy is a global technology leader for city resilience at Jacobs Engineering. I'm sorry about that. So Jacobs Engineering is a major company in the area of construction, and I'm sure Susy will be talking about that very soon. And she is a colleague of Dr. John Moggy, I suppose. Dr. Moggy is a friend of our college and also an affiliate professor and also a good friend of mine. Susy is an accomplished organizational strategist with 29 years of local government experience in South Florida as assistant county city manager, Miami-Dade County's first sustainability director, and Miami Beach's first chief resilience officer. Now at Jacobs, she is working with cities, military installations, and private developers in identifying risk and building resilience in plans, policies, and projects. So with that, I will conclude my opening remarks, and I welcome Susy Torriente for her presentation. We can spend 35, maybe maximum 40 minutes, and after that, we'll have a Q&A. So Susy, the stage is yours.
Thank you so much, Dean. Thank you for the kind words. It's definitely a pleasure to be here with everyone this afternoon. If you don't mind, I'm going to go ahead and start to share my slides.
Absolutely.
So that we can go through the presentation, and then I welcome any feedback, comments, either during or at the end, or I think we'll be monitoring, and then if we want to have a chat during or after, I'm perfectly comfortable either way. So again, thank you for the opportunity to be here. Let me just briefly kind of go through our agenda today. I want to walk through a little bit about me and a little bit why I chose this topic, talk to you a little bit about my organization and another organization that I am now on the board of the directors. It's the American Society of Adaptation Professionals. And it's a professional society that has living principles of climate adaptation that I want to share and show how, in fact, we at Jacobs and me through my career and my opportunities, both in government and now sitting here in Jacobs, how I'm applying this code, if you will, and this guide of these principles on climate change adaptation. I'm going to use a real life case study, and it's a project that we did that Jacobs, my colleagues and I, we did in Reynolds Park down in Miami-Dade last year. Talk a little bit about how the principles apply and align, and hopefully we'll have some discussion at the end. As the Dean mentioned, 29 years in local government in South Florida, spent the bulk of my time in buildings like this, city halls, county halls, and I had the opportunity to get to the point of assistant county manager, assistant city manager. I was Miami-Dade's first sustainability director and Miami Beach's first chief resilience officer. It was definitely a great experience, 29 years of local government as a strategist and as a policy person. I came into the climate world, some maybe even say by accident, because I'm actually not trained as a scientist or as an engineer, but rather I'm an English major and a public administration professional. But the last 10 years or so, I've gotten involved in climate adaptation and climate mitigation, and more so now resilience. And so, through the years and through these different organizations, I've had quite a bit of an opportunity to do some resilience planning, most recently with Resilient 305, which was a project in Miami-Dade, which I'll mention a little later. Strategic planning, vision plans, regional climate action plans, case studies for the state. And again, Miami-Dade's first sustainability plan was Greenprint back in about 10 years ago. And I wanted to talk a little bit about sustainability and resilience, because both are getting a lot of attention here in my organization. And it, helps me explain a little bit of why I chose this topic. So I always like to start presentations too by level setting and making sure that we all are using the same language. And a very simple definition for sustainability and resilience that we're using here in Jacobs when we're communicating with clients or with even our own teams is that sustainability is really how we impact the environment, and it starts with a functioning system. And resilience is actually how the environment impacts us, and it starts more with a disruption. But both are needed for healthy societies. And on climate action, I noticed that a lot of your speakers in the past are focused on climate mitigation, right? And it's that intervention, it's to reduce greenhouse gases, and we have a definite commitment here in our company to do that. But my experience has been on the climate adaptation side of the house, of adjusting to an actual or expected climate situation, right? And its effects. So I think that's how I wanted to do something a little different and apply some of these principles from my professional organization into a case study that I'm doing or that I did in my work here now. And so a little bit about Jacobs, as the dean mentioned earlier. Jacobs is a very large solutions delivery organization, and it's really well known for engineering and design and construction. But we're really in a lot of different markets, nuclear, power, cyber, water, wastewater, transportation, buildings. And so, and more so this year, Jacobs is really putting more focus and more attention on sustainability and resilience. And in fact, I'm part of an advisory now inside strategic consulting that's focused on resilience and sustainability as an advisory. And so I think one of your previous speakers in another event you may have had, Holly Schmidt, who lives in the Tampa area, she's heading up that organization for Jacobs. But quickly at a glance, we're in 400 different communities all over the world with 55,000 employees. And so I'd like to say that we're local, right? Because we call 400 cities home or communities, but we're also global. We can pick up the phone, get on a Teams call and reach out and talk to colleagues and get that help and experience all over the world. I can be some mornings talking to, Australia, and then some evenings talking to Saudi. And so that's how far our reach is. But again, we're local. We have about 4,000 staff here in the state of Florida. We have offices all over Florida and right there in Tampa, and really recognized for a lot of these different issues, like I mentioned earlier, but quite a bit on resilience and my background in city resilience. What I do as a global technology leader is bring that experience to client cities now. So now let me talk a little bit about this organization, the American Society of Adaptation Professionals. It's an organization that I knew when it began in 2011, and it was created to build a home for people working on climate change adaptation. Because quite frankly, it was a new field, right? It was new, it was evolving, it was growing. And it was really important for this group to come together and bridge the gap, the geographical gap, the sectoral gaps, because quite frankly, climate adaptation professionals come in all shapes and sizes. And they could be scientists, they could be engineers, they can be urban planners, or they can be more liberal arts oriented, like the way I was trained. And one of the tools that they have shared and put out is this living guide. And it's a compilation of existing and aspirational principles for effective adaptation practice. And it's built on literature, but it's also built on real life examples. And it's really the way I've been, conducting, my work over the last 10 years. And I brought that and shed light into a traditional vulnerability assessment that we did for the Reynolds Park down in Miami-Dade. Talking a little bit about the membership, and I was mentioning before the call, it's very nice that it's quite diverse. 26% of our members are private sector, 23% each from government and academia, and 20% nonprofit. So it's a nice mix of practitioners from these different fronts, if you will. And you can be an organizational member like us. You can be an individual member, or there's even student membership rates as well. And again, it's a very interesting place to really, rub elbows and really to talk to folks that are frontline in this field. Jacobs is an organizational member. As you can see, there's many others, and you'll see some of the universities there as well, I was pointing out earlier. So a little bit about the guide. The guide is designed to articulate the values, norms, and goals and practices that have emerged through over a decade of real experimentation and research on the ground, like I said, frontline in climate adaptation field. So this case study I'm going to share with you is an example of the living guide to adaptation, and how it's practical and actionable over time. We looked at the park, and I'll show you how we looked at it in systems, right? So we were thinking in systems. We looked at it because the parks are for people. They're not just things that you can engineer your solution into. Parks are for people, and we didn't want to forget that. And it was important to work within the context of knowing the history of the park, the history of the county, and then, of course, the parks for people, where people go and live and play and enjoy. I also wanted to mention that we use the best available science to do our work, and I'll point that out as well. So as we move along, the one of the main desired outcomes of the living principles is to enhance the adaptive capacity and reduce exposure and sensitivity. And you're going to see that in our report. We went through the process of analyzing exposure and sensitivity and created opportunities for adaptive capacity. So here's the Reynolds case study and some pictures of the actual park. What's neat about this park is the fact that it covers about 250 acres of parkland in Northeast Miami-Dade County. It has areas for picnics, for community events, it has trails, it has a golf course, playgrounds, campgrounds, all sorts of areas to play. It is right on the Oleta River State Park and the Intercoastal. So right next to water, clearly vulnerable. But the history is fun because it was once a Seminole Indian trading post. It was later the site of a rock quarry that produced limestone that was used to build actually a lot of the South Florida homes and bridges. And that's another story for another presentation, I'm sure, on limestone and the climate vulnerabilities of South Florida. But it was officially dedicated as a park back in 1936. So it's the oldest, second oldest park down in Miami. And in 1983, it became a historic site. So again, adding to the complication of adaptation. Sorry for going backwards. The project began with clear expectations. Evaluate the current and future flood risk. So it's 2020, 2040, 2070, with a 100-year storm event and sea level rise. Develop the flood mitigation strategies and projects, and then help the park prioritize their capital plan. So we started by, again, recognizing the context of the living principles and going back and understanding the vision and mission of the park system and the park. And it's really important that we understood that parks were about connecting people and parks life. And so I think that's very important anytime we start a project is really to put it in context. Also important is to recognize the alignment with the county as a whole, right? Miami-Dade County is the largest county in Florida, and it has a rich history of climate adaptation and mitigation planning. going all the way back to the 90s. I actually used to work in Miami-Dade County. I started in 1990. I was there until about 2011. And so I was able to participate in a lot of this early work of the South Florida Climate Change Compact, which is the four counties of the Southeast came together in 2010 and said, we're going to work on regional planning and regional collaboration. That model of the regional compact for climate has been a model for many communities around the country, including Tampa Bay. The Tampa Regional Planning Council has a resilience compact as well, which again is modeled and a lot over by what happened, what we did in South Florida. So many tools came out of that work: regional climate action plans, unified sea level rise projections. And then most recently, Miami-Dade County participated with Miami Beach and the city of Miami, creating Resilient 305, which is the resilient strategy for the region. It was part of the Rockefeller 100 Resilient Cities process. And I had the good fortune of being part of that as well, and being the Miami Beach Chief Resilience Officer when that occurred. So working on this project has been real satisfying for me personally, because all these plans that we talked about for years, we were able to apply it to an actual project on the ground in the park system. But let me kind of point out just quickly how we use the best available science and use projections about future conditions. This is the Unified Sea Level Rise projections for Southeast Florida. Like I said, those four counties, Palm Beach, Broward, Miami-Dade, and Monroe, the Keys. And this is a tool that's used for planning purposes around the region. Basically, what this tells us is that sea level is projected to rise 10 to 17 inches by 2040 from that 1990 baseline. And then we expect 21 to 54 inches by 2070. We know that in South Florida, sea level has risen about 4 inches already from that year 2000. So this is the science that we used and applied to our project. Going back to the Resilient 305, the work that I just mentioned, it was a 3-year process culminating in a series of recommendations for building resilience in Miami-Dade. And one of the important first action items that's called out in our strategy down in Miami is integrating resilience into parks and open spaces. And so this was, again, very fulfilling, because it was an opportunity to take something I had written on a piece of paper and came into a book, right? But now it's actually coming to life with this project. Creating resilient design opportunities that address flooding, sea level rise, but also promote recreational opportunities, creates natural habitats, restores ecology, and improves community cohesion. So as the senior resilience advisor on the team working with this project, it was my responsibility to remind the technical team of these, kind of these, let's say, these objectives and this alignment with the bigger picture. The project methodology here, I'm sharing what we used as the team. We looked at exposure and sensitivity, like I mentioned earlier, modeled the different scenarios, 2040, 2070. Started with the condition assessment and understanding flood depth. We went through the process from goal setting to looking at the data and the different scenarios, understanding the vulnerabilities and the risks, then coming up with actual strategies, coming up with project evaluation and ranking, and then leaving the park and the park system with a roadmap. We started with that goal setting and site visit. It took place during kind of the height of COVID, still 2020, but our staff did the work both in person there with the site visit, but also remotely. And the site visit created products like this, where general notes about, elevation, condition, observations about the facility, right? And a lot of stuff that was at grade, a lot of stuff that was, already being, flooded, or, maybe seawalls or roads that were not at maintained at the level that it needed. A lot of times parks are competing with general fund dollars, in large systems and in large places like Miami-Dade. And so a lot of times when you're looking at the vulnerability of these places, it's exacerbated by some deferred maintenance. At a glance, these are the park is rather large. There's a lot of different facilities that we looked at, and everything from rooms to cabins to the golf pro, the shop, the parking lot, the picnic shelters. We looked at everything. And so here's a quick summary of some of what we found out. Under a 2020 scenario, right, with a 100-year storm and no sea level rise, you have about 8 facilities that are impacted right now, and about 4% of the horizontal assets. As you move to 2040, though, right, and a 100-year storm, and then you add about a foot of sea level rise, you have more facilities impacted, 12 now, and close to half of the horizontal assets impacted. And then as you keep going to 2070, with the scenario of 100-year storms and almost 3 feet of sea level rise, then you start to see more facilities impacted, and it's essentially most of the park is impacted at this point. And it's important to look at these maps and say, you know, these are the impacts if we do nothing. But we're working with the park, we're working with the organization to intervene, to adapt, to do something. And so you'll see that coming up next. But it's important to, sometimes when I see these maps and you know, it's so scary, but it's important to say this is about what happens if we do nothing. But fortunately, there's a plan to do something. This is the same information, but sort of visually at a glance, where you can see, you know, less concerned and not that many projects in 2020. But as you move on, there's more projects that need to be tackled. And same effect. This is just a different way to look at exposure and sea level rise at king tide. And then we started to also, you know, again, portray it in a different manner. So at a glance, you can see the facilities from the most vulnerable boathouse to what is the least vulnerable, the gatehouse, which is relatively new. This helps inform the decision-making process as to what capital projects need to be prioritized with those scarce dollars. And so this is just another tool that we use to visualize results. So here's starting to summarize our recommendations in a bit. We wanted to support the environmental and social stewardship goals of the park and the park system. And so we recommended a multi-pronged approach to implementing the adaptation strategies. We started, of course, with strategies and design standards, traditional gray infrastructure interventions. I'll show you some examples, to harden and to elevate and to flood proof. Very traditional. You see this all the time. But I thought it was important, again, let's step back. Let's look at context. Let's look at the mission and vision of the system, right? How do you apply the living principles of climate adaptation? So you focus on complementary blue-green infrastructure and nature-based solutions to help the park, and also, you know, make the park still be a park and a place where people can go and play and enjoy. And then, because it's a park and parks are always sources of public information, public gathering, let's use this as an opportunity to engage, to educate about climate change, and to talk about climate adaptation and what could be done. And so that's our 3-pronged approach. But let me just give you just some examples of, you know, the traditional things like elevation. So this, you know, elevate certain equipment, but then also put that in your design guidelines so that future equipment is not at grade, but now moving forward, institutionalize this new guidance for elevation. Same with hardening. Installing flood panels and maybe waterproofing certain building envelopes, right? Sealing those wet wells, you know, using that submersible type of equipment. And then again, on the flip side, not only do it, but put it into your design guidelines and into your policies. Same with elevation, roadway elevation, park trail elevation, parking lots. Redesign those and reconstruct those at a different level, and then put that regulatory guideline into your policies and plans moving forward. Another one is elevation. Here's a pedestrian bridge that is at the park, and how we're recommending to redesign it and construct it at above the flood elevation. More hardening. All right, and then the nature-based solutions. Moving on to recommendation number 2, we wanted to have complementary blue-green nature-based enhancements at the park. And these are just some examples of how some of that would work, whether it's, maybe some floating boardwalks, some more mangrove plantings, the type of material that's used. Blue-green infrastructure alone is not going to reduce flood risk, but it may provide other co-benefits for the park that are terribly important. And so co-benefits are water and air quality improvements, social and environmental, economic, there's aesthetic values and all that. And when and where you use blue-green infrastructure really depends on a variety of site-specific factors. You got to look at land use, location, topography, ground, water elevation, soil conditions. So all of that needs to be detailed at the time of actual design and construction. And then finally, public information. And this is just one example of another public information climate tool that's used down in Miami. It's called a community resilience pod. It's just an old shipping container that has been repurposed to have climate information. And this is a unit that can go to special events, community events, school events, and it's a place to bring people in and start engaging them in that dialogue and what can you do about climate adaptation and mitigation. And just a few other things that we did, going back to the projects, we were able to rank them and put them in different tiers so that they can start thinking about their capital improvement projects over time. Highest priority is most immediate things you got to do now versus midterm, and then of course long term. And here's another way to look at it. The projects that really should start now, the bulk of projects that need to be tackled midterm, before getting to 2040. And then the other projects at the end there, there's some time to adapt. But what's important here that it gets on a timeline and that it gets and becomes part of a funding strategy. Funding costs are going to vary, but investment return is clearly higher when you're implementing it in advance of a storm and you're capturing these avoided costs. It's really important, and you may have heard it from FEMA, any dollar spent today on mitigation, you're saving $6 if you have to rebuild after an event. And the cost benefit analysis essentially told us the same thing. It's better to do now than later. We left the park with some funding and coordination considerations. There's all sorts of interesting Florida grants now for the first time, coordinating with other departments, with emergency management, again, FEMA grants, and coordinating with other agencies inside the county. We're broadening their view and linking them to sources beyond their department. And then we also noted that during the time that we did this project, other things are happening. So it's important not to look at these things in a vacuum. And there was 3 other very important reports that came out from the county that could indeed affect and influence these projects when they're ready for design and construction. There's a mayor's office plan of action on septic to sewer vulnerable to sea level rise. Miami-Dade County still has a lot of septic tanks, unfortunately. And this is an older neighborhood, like I mentioned. So there's some, the surrounding community, it has septic that needs to be converted to sewer, Miami-Dade sewer. And so again, looking at it in context, how can the park adapt while the neighborhood adapts? And again, aligning and connecting those dots within county halls is important. Like I said earlier, this park is right on the intercoastal, right next to Biscayne Bay. So that it's important to understand water quality issues there. And then the county put together a sea level rise strategy for the county as a whole. Many similar recommendations like what we recommended here, hardening, elevation, blue-green, policy changes and things like that. So we are very much in line. So the park is in the process of developing the design guidelines of finalizing their prioritization, amending their capital improvement program, and obviously developing the public information now that our work is complete. And next for Jacobs, we're going to continue doing what we do. You know, we're moving on to different projects. We're moving on to you know, kind of, you know, continuing to learn. I wanted to share this slide because it's our it's really our vision and values, challenging today and reinventing tomorrow, and building resilience into really all the different projects that we work on, and delivering resilient cities and communities and places all around the world. And with that, I just wanted to say, one, thank you very much for your attention. Looking forward to chatting more and some dialogue. And if you want to learn a little bit more about the American Society for Adaptation Professionals, here is their website. Like I said, there's individual memberships, there's student memberships, very good resources if you're just graduating, getting out into the world, getting to meet professionals and look for opportunities. I highly recommend looking into that. So with that, thank you very much. And I hopefully we'll have some conversation. Thank you.
Thank you, Susy. Right. Very interesting presentation. So I do have a couple of questions, but I would like to defer them to my colleagues and our students who are there and our guests. So anyone with questions or clarifications? You can unmute your speaker button and then please say your name and ask your question. Okay, people seem to be rather shy, but so then they must be gathering the thoughts. So let me ask, so this particular project that you have undertaken, I think it is at the recommendation of the county, or is it based on the vulnerability of this park? Now, if you followed the IPCCs or the most extreme version of the NOAA's scenario, much of the land will be underwater, right? I mean, being the elevation is so low for much of Florida. And I don't know much about this geography of this park.
Sure.
So would this be useful then for the general public? The idea of reinforcing certain structures, raising them,
Sure,
would be useful, but you're assuming that it might be not a permanent thing, but it could be flooding connected with the tides and things like that. Is that the situation that you're foreseeing?
Well, you know, it's climate adaptation is, you know, and I used to say this all the time. It's not a one solution for one time. It's a journey, right? And so the unified sea level rise projections that are used in South Florida are based on IPCC and NOAA, but then regionalized and really developed by local experts, scientists, engineers, people in the field. And this data is used to basically adapt over time. In South Florida, they've made a decision to adapt. They're not ready to have conversations about retreat, right? And so, like I said, we understanding the risk, right? And using that information, there's no reason why that park can't be enjoyed in that community, you know, 20 right now, 2040, 2070. In 2070, when there's another generation of city managers and consultants looking at this, they might have other recommendations, right? And they might, the park will evolve and adapt to something else. But we have enough information now that we know that we can do incremental adaptation over time and still enjoy, get the other benefits. And you know, let's not prejudge what the next generation will do.
Sure, absolutely, right. Right. I mean, I was not challenging you at all.
No.
This is leading to my next question, which is there thinking out there, at least just a thought experiment, that ultimately we have to build dikes and barriers for flooding to prevent, like what the Netherlands did.
No.
I mean, not in the climate change scenario, but in a different context for them. But so is that something that is entertained? That's why I asked the previous question.
It's a great question. It's a great question. So what's interesting about South Florida, I think I mentioned in the beginning how that was a historic park and it was a limestone quarry, right? And a lot of that limestone was used to build like roads and you know all sorts of things. So if you dig in that area, you immediately get into this limestone. Limestone is porous, right? And so in down in South Florida, you're sitting on porous limestone and you're nestled in between Biscayne Bay and the Atlantic Ocean. So you're essentially surrounded by water. And the water's not just coming from the Everglades and the ocean, it's actually coming up from the bottom.
Mhm.
And so some of these interventions that are used by the Dutch and are used in different places, they're not going to work in South Florida. And so that's why hardening and elevating over time is really the best approach right now. Unless, again, another generation, another technology, maybe some of your students, you know, will be creative and start dealing with this when they're in my seat.
Right. Yeah. Any massive investment in building dikes and barriers, right? Something that have to be entertained, at least considered as an option.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Hi,
right.
Dean. I see George has his hand up.
George's hand. Yep.
Hi, Susy. Good presentation. I used to live and work in Miami-Dade and in the Gables, so a little bit familiar with the efforts there. But one thing I wanted to ask you that I found interesting is a lot of these efforts down south in South Florida seem to be driven, not necessarily driven, but supported strongly by the businesses, by the private sector, because there is concern about the impact that that climate change and the rising sea levels will have. And one thing I observed is that this concern and this effort now has crossed political lines, party lines, and that's very interesting. I just wanted to ask for a comment on that.
No, but you're so right. When I started working on this type of stuff back in 2010, it was very much political, and there's certain, you know, the R's and the D's, but now it's not a political issue. It's not a partisan issue. It's, you know, when it rains and it floods, or when it's king tide and it floods and the storm comes, you don't, you know, you call City Hall and you want it fixed. And it doesn't matter, you know, the storm doesn't say it's red or blue or it's a Democrat or Republican. And so I think a lot of experience, a lot of time, the public information, that's why it was so important to be part of this, right? You need to engage the public, you need to inform. And so I think a series of, you know, real events, you know, Hurricane Irma back in 2017, more flooding, more extreme weather events, these things are happening. And I think it's helping to depoliticize the conversation in South Florida for sure. I've seen that and it's very rewarding. The other thing, I couldn't agree more on the business community but there's been a real effort from the Compact and the Southeast Florida Compact partners to engage the business community. And if you're interested, the Compact actually did a study on the business case for adaptation, and it was done by the Urban Land Institute. So if you look up the Compact, or, you know, I could follow up with Kelly and send her a link, but there is a whole business case analysis of adapting to climate change in South Florida. And bottom line is worth it. You know, it's still worth it right now to invest and adapt and still continue to enjoy the community and continue to enjoy, quite frankly, a rich tax base that as you collect that money, then you can reinvest in the city. So it's a cycle, right? And I think it's a very important investment loop of, you know, you can either retreat, disappear, go away, and then what's going to happen? maybe it's going to prematurely, fade. But if you start to really invest and nurture and invest in that infrastructure, you're essentially, buying some time and maybe buying again time for another generation of new technology, or something happens. But you're very right, George, on both those points.
Thank you.
Are there any questions in the chat, Kelly? I haven't checked any. Let me check the chat. Nothing we can see. Kelly?
Yes, I don't see anything in the chat yet. I do have a question for you, Susy. You mentioned about the project Resilient 305 and the Grenolds Park. So the funding from that, I'm understanding, comes from grants and the Rockefeller Foundation. How is that relationship today between the community partners and corporations such as Jacobs Engineering? Where do you meet? What does that collaboration look like?
Well, we have a lot of resources, like I mentioned, 55,000 employees, 400 communities, and this global reach. When I was in City Hall, one of the things I used to say was if I can't find the answer inside City Hall, I would do a procurement, I would do an RFP, I would go outside and get the resources from the community, and from the practitioners and from consultants. And so I think the private sector plays a role in finding solutions and adapting, because these are the communities we live in, as well. And so that the partnership continues. I know that Resilient 305 is the plan is complete, but there is a group of staff from the governments that's still working on implementation, and this is a perfect example of implementation.
Okay.
I was curious perhaps to ask the audience if they wouldn't mind, and maybe they can throw it in the chat. Like,
Yeah.
Are anybody involved in kind of climate adaptation type of work? Like I said, I wanted to have this conversation and kind of have the other side of climate action, because a lot of your work is focused on mitigation, right? And so I'd just be curious to, from the audience, are you students, are you practitioners, and are you in the field of adapting to climate change, or in the field of resilience, of understanding risk and then doing things to reduce risk? So if anybody wants to chime in from the audience or throw something in the chat, and
yeah,
kind of...
that would be nice. Another important aspect of our speaker series is for advocating for our students to get opportunities with organizations that the speakers represent. In terms of internship opportunities for them, or future job, things like that. So what do you think of this particular space in terms of resilience? Not necessarily with of course, with Jacobs would be wonderful, but also with the counties or other organizations that,
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Jacobs has a very nice internship program that you probably already know from Dr. Mogi, and I've been very impressed with the quality and caliber of students that I met over the summer. And in fact, I've known some that are actually then been able to move on to full-time positions. So I would totally recommend that your students look into those Jacobs opportunities for internships in the summer.
Okay.
But I can tell you from experience, cities and counties, a lot of times they don't have huge budgets. And so having student interns, whether paid or perhaps at a rate that, is not, too burdensome, is huge. I've had so many good experiences with students coming in, working on projects, and it gives them a great opportunity to learn, put something on the resume. I just connected a student to the city of Gainesville. So a student from at UF, I knew the city manager, made that connection. Boom, she's now a sustainability intern. And so I think I'm a huge believer in that. I started in Miami-Dade County as a management trainee myself, straight out of grad school. So, huge fan of those opportunities, and resume building and those types of mentorships are very important.
Absolutely. Our students have found positions. Most recent, I read one of our former students found position as sustainability manager for Orlando School District. I think one of our students recently.
Nice.
And so many other examples out there for our students. So
is the audience students, or
there were
everybody's so
students,
shy? Maybe they could tell me if they're students or.
There were
Yeah,
some students, I think.
Yeah, mostly students, faculty, and some from outside.
I don't know why.
It's a mix. Susy, another question in the meantime, since people are shy. To your knowledge, the city of Miami or Miami Beach or other cities, are they setting aside, are they including their budgets? Are they allocating any of their funds to start addressing, enhancing resilience and taking adaptation steps?
Absolutely, absolutely. I worked for 4 years in Miami Beach, and one of the things that I was very adamant about was when you have these plans, you have to align them with the budget and make sure that, if there's actions, they need to be prioritized in the budget. The budget is the most important document that comes out of a local government. And if you don't make it in there, you're not going to make it. And so I know that's happening in Miami Beach. I know that's happening in Miami. Local governments are funding a lot of this work through on their own dime through their stormwater fee and the local fees with general obligation bonds. Miami Beach did one. Miami did the Miami Forever, 200 million. So a lot of that has been happening locally. What's interesting is this last legislative session with the state was the first time that I can recall that I've been in this business where the state actually put money towards resilience. And there's all these Florida resilience grants now available through the Florida Department of Environmental Protection for vulnerability assessments, sea level rise assessments, climate assessments, and not just coastal, really everybody, because you may be coastal and have flood risks, but you could be inland and have other risks. And if you look at resilience in the broadest sense, it's not just, water. Resilience in California is about fires, right? And droughts. And, resilience is about pandemics. It's so many different things. So I think that more and more that alignment with the budget, I'm starting to see it again as that kind of the evolution of the profession.
Right. Talking about budgets, I heard that last year's legislature appropriated quite a bit of money for Flood Hub project. And my colleague, my fellow dean of marine science, Tom Fraser, who previously was chief scientific officer for the state, has now been there. I think we have a plan to ask for funding from that project. So do you know anything about that? I'm not sure whether that was really appropriated and the governor signed off on that.
Yes, it was appropriated. The governor signed off, and these grants are now available.
Oh, great. Okay.
It's wonderful.
If so, nobody else has any question, then I don't want to keep you. Oh, Kelly, did you? There was one question.
Yes, Dean, I did want to recognize someone in the chat box. Our guest Sheila. She says, "Hi, I own Embrace Less Waste, a zero waste store in Wesley Chapel." And she found our speaker series. She was looking for someone to speak about sustainability in Tampa Bay. So that was her comment. Sheila, if you're still with us, do you have a specific question for someone? I also wanted to mention that one of our alum also has a textile composting project that she is leading in Rosebud, which is in Land O'Lakes. That's Erica McDania. So Sheila, you might want to reach out to Erica as well on your zero waste initiative.
Okay. All right.
I guess it's worth mentioning that we're talking about, sustainability and climate, on the mitigation side. I have the good fortune of being part of a team that's working with the City of Tampa on a climate action and equity plan. We're just getting that process started. We'll be working with Tampa. Hopefully I can get over there and spend some time and maybe meet you in person. I'm just in Orlando, so I'm at Central Florida, we're neighbors. But it's pretty exciting to I'm going to be working on 2 projects in your part of the state. One is a climate action and equity plan for the city, and another one is a coastal action plan for the city as well, grant funded, and hopefully doing some work in Pinellas County as well, through some of these grants that are coming down from the state. Your city and county, they're very good grant writers. And so I think they're taking advantage of those opportunities to build resilience in your community.
Yeah, and also there might be money for Florida from the federal effort of infrastructure plan, and
Indeed.
if they pass, I mean that's the thing. They
Someday.
come out of it or not.
Someday.
I did have a comment and a quick question.
Oh, sure.
I know you're asking who's students and who's not. I'm a student. And also, I don't work in the sustainability field, but I do work in the environmental sector. And we do like analytical testing for like petroleum and, hydrocarbons and all that good stuff. And I wanted to, you mentioned hardening, and I was curious of how hardening will affect like runoff water. You did mention like Florida is very porous, and whenever there's runoff, our earth kind of like helps cleanse that runoff. But if we're having hardening, wouldn't that kind of affect that in a way?
Well, and that's why it was important to recommend the complementary blue-green infrastructure to as exactly deal with that and deal with the water quality. And so I think what I've learned in my journey with resilience and climate adaptation is that it's important to look at the system as a whole and not just do one intervention that could hurt maybe something else. It's important to look at things holistically. And it's important that you don't harden to the point where you hurt water quality, but you harden enough and you have that balance and you complement it. And so I think that's the whole, also a very nice way to embrace these living principles of climate adaptation and step back and respectfully, I work with a lot of very smart engineers who want to just engineer the solution. And in this project in particular, I remember coming back and saying the recommendations were harden and elevate, period. And I said, whoa, we can't just do that. It's a park. Remember, kids go and play in these parks. People enjoy the parks. And so I think that you're right. It's important to look at making sure that the recommendations that we make and the interventions that we make don't hurt the system and that it's a balanced approach. Thank you for the question and the comment.
Thank you.
Thanks. So with that, let us conclude this very interesting presentation with Susy Torriente. We really appreciate taking your time to spend with us. I hope that you will stop by our college if you come by Tampa, part of your project that you talked about, you mentioned earlier.
I would love to.
Take to lunch, or you can meet with some of our faculty and some of our students and colleagues. So with that, let's once again thank Susy Torriente for this nice presentation. Thank you so much, and we'll be in touch. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Have a wonderful
Thank
evening.
you.